is gone.
Superhero movies. There are a lot of them. Far more than I've been able to deal with. Despite my total infatuation for this genre growing up, the continual influx of these films has begun to wear on me, which isn't helped by the fact that they also continue to lose any sense of artistic identity or creative distinction. There's admittedly some attempt to distinguish these films from each other by adopting various genre influences, but that doesn't change their inherently formulaic nature. Not that there aren't talented filmmakers behind these movies either. I mean, that's rarely the case. But honestly, they can't shake this manufactured and focus group tested quality. More often than not, their ambitions appear to be more financial than creative, and rarely do these films seem to be the result of any artistic vision. It all mostly just feels like studio bait by this point. The reason I have so much frustration over this recent trend is that because the superhero genre used to be a creative enterprise, and it wasn't restricted artistically by the pressures of commercial expectations. There are multiple cases of this, but the definitive example might also be the most underrated one. This brings me to Sam Raimi's Darkman.
From director Sam Raimi. Darkman.
Released in 1990, this was Raimi's first foray into major studio filmmaking, after achieving critical recognition for his first two Evil Dead movies. Given where this film lines up in his filmography, it's hard not to see Darkman as a bridge of sorts between Raimi's Evil Dead trilogy and his Spider-Man trilogy that would come more than a decade later. But even though Darkman bears similarities to Raimi's other works, and it definitely draws influences from various sectors of popular culture, it remains a wholly original film that deserves respect for its expressive style, compelling performances, and riveting set pieces. That was basically a long way of saying, Darkman is one of the greatest things to ever exist ever, and I say that with no hyperbole. Okay, that may be an exaggeration, but it is grossly overlooked, and deserves far more appreciation than it currently gets. It has a cult following, sure, but that's not good enough for me. Darkman deserves to be a cult movie in the literal sense. This movie should be worshipped and idolized from here to generations onward. Okay, again, that might be an exaggeration, and by this point you can probably tell that my affection for this movie is based on more than just sheer quality. Though I do think this movie is great in its own way. This is one of those movies that I feel a personal attachment to. It was the first R-rated movie that I ever saw, for one thing. At a time when I was exposed mostly to superhero films and Universal monster movies, this movie introduced me to an entirely different level of filmmaking. I mean, I thought the climax of Spider-Man was intense. I was not prepared for any of this. But Darkman challenged my expectations and defied any sort of classification. It's a movie that's within a league of its own. And it's just the type of cinematic innovation that you just don't see much of anymore. I'd say that Darkman is one of my favorite comic book movies, except that it's not based on a comic reel. This is an entirely original mythology that Sam Raimi has constructed. Of course, Raimi had originally wanted to adapt Batman or The Shadow, but he failed to get the rights, and instead developed a short story that would become the feature film you see here. Summarizing the plot of Darkman in a condensed fashion is surprisingly complicated, but I'll do my best. Dr. Payne Westlake is trying to develop a formula for synthetic skin when, somewhat ironically, a group of mobsters burn and mutilate him before destroying his lab. Thought to be dead by the world, including his girlfriend, Westlake embarks on a quest for revenge while also trying to reconnect with his former lover. Superficially, the plot is almost suspiciously reminiscent of RoboCop. We have a well-meaning protagonist who is severely maimed by a gang of criminals who all work for a maniacal corporate figure who's trying to develop an ambitious real estate property. But Darkman distinguishes itself with its morose tone, dynamic visuals, and gothic atmosphere. Combined with Raimi's penchant for the insane and chaotic, and Darkman's style is entirely distinct and unmistakable. But it also establishes one of the most unique and memorable protagonists for a superhero film that I'll probably ever see. Everything about this character, from his design to his backstory, is dynamic, enthralling, and captivating, which is also helped by Liam Neeson's performance in his breakthrough role here. I've often heard Darkman described as campy, but if that's the case, then apparently nobody told that to Liam Neeson, because this is a performance of total conviction, and there's not a false beat. And not only does Liam Neeson deliver an explosive performance, but he's supported with layered characterization. Darkman undergoes one of the most depressing character arcs I think I've seen in any blockbuster, but it's given enough time to develop naturally. It's pretty safe to say that Darkman is the most heartbreakingly tragic film to also feature a gangster whose prosthetic leg also doubles as a machine gun. And that's not to neglect the supporting cast, each of them excelling in their respective roles. A pre-Fargo Frances McDormand plays Julie Hastings, and brings her usual level of professionalism, elevating what could easily have been a stale and typical character. Sure, she's a damsel in distress by the end, but she still gives the role dimension and weight. Then there's Larry Drake as Robert G. Durant, one of the most effectively creepy and menacing bastards of cinema. I think the main reason behind this is because the character is so wonderfully understated and subtle. Everything about him just comes across so naturally. Lastly, there's Colin Friels as Louis Strack Jr., the shady but powerful real estate developer who's also revealed to be responsible for Payne's attack. Admittedly, there's not much to the character, and he's really more of a plot device than anything, but Friels' sleazy and conceited performance at least makes the character entertaining to watch. But perhaps the most essential role that's being played here is the camera itself. Sam Raimi and cinematographer Bill Pope have turned this pulp material into an operatic spectacle. With the proficiency of a seasoned pro, Raimi is able to articulate the emotional undercurrent of each scene in a fully cinematic fashion. Aside from a brief hospital scene, there's virtually no exposition. Almost everything is communicated to the audience visually. Now, given how I've showered this movie with praise, the question arises of just why it's been so overlooked since its initial release. Sure, again, it does have a cult following, but nowhere near the level of Raimi's other films, especially Evil Dead 2, which I just don't get. For years, Evil Dead fans have been begging for another addition to the franchise, despite the fact that they got an entire trilogy's worth of content. Where's the outcry for a Darkman revival? But the gods of cinema have been way more kind to the Evil Dead camp because not only did they get a reboot, but an entire television series starring Bruce Campbell himself. Darkman, on the other hand, has had the prestigious honor of getting 2 mediocre straight-to-DVD sequels and an unaired pilot for a failed attempt at a television series. And sure, Darkman performed decently at the box office, especially compared to the Evil Dead trilogy, but the public's interest is more attributable to the marketing campaign than Darkman's actual content, even by Raimi's own admission. But why is that? I would attribute the continual lack of public exposure to the fact that Darkman is a superhero movie without a superhero. That's perhaps the most shocking and distinctive aspect about Darkman, its conscious refusal to conform to the traditional superhero formula. Throughout the course of the film, Darkman does nothing but brutally murder his attackers while displaying nothing but satisfaction. Sure, these people happen to be vicious criminals, and the world is certainly better off without them, but Darkman isn't on a mission of goodwill here. He's out to settle a personal vendetta. Two-Face spent most of his screen time taking out monsters, but that didn't make him a role model. Just take some of Darkman's scenes out of context and remove the superhero label, and then tell me if you'd put this character alongside the likes of Superman. Honestly, this shouldn't be considered as an origin story for a superhero, but a supervillain. If it weren't for the sequels, I'd have to assume that this character would end up as an embittered ghoul having totally given up on humanity, spending the remainder of his empty, pathetic life trying and failing to perfect his formula, while more than likely resorting to thievery and possibly murder to attain it. Darkman is a film that blends together various genre conventions and forms into something entirely unique, so this direction only makes sense. Rather than play it safe and follow the traditional formula, Darkman breaks away from the mold and uses genre expectations to its advantage. The ending is already tragic, but with the superhero angle, it just gives it another layer, because as the audience, we expect Darkman to make the right decision, and his refusal to change for the better is only more painful as a result because it clashes with our expectations. Much like Julie, we're desperately hoping for Payne to regain his humanity, which makes the finality of his transformation from benevolent scientist to vengeful monster just all the more tragic. While Darkman isn't a film for everyone, with its bleak storyline, unpleasant tone, and bitter characters, I would still encourage anyone to try and see it, especially if you're in the market for something fresh and invigorating. Even after this recent tsunami of superhero-based entertainment, Darkman still remains a provocative and remarkable entry among the genre that deserves far more recognition than it's granted. If we're going to live in a society that allows for not one but two Spider-Man reboots within the span of 5 years,
I think we'd have room in our hearts for some more Darkman movies. So consider this review as also a plea to spread awareness about this film, because quite frankly, I think the current assembly line of Marvel products could take some cues from it. Though I do appreciate the new release, my hopes for Darkman are far loftier and delusional in nature, because if Sam Raimi is going to revive his old franchises, then I think it's time to expand on this property. And if Liam Neeson is going to dedicate the rest of his career to these revenge thrillers, then why not return to the one that jump-started his career? Because there is no way in hell that a sequel to Darkman could be anything but a critical and commercial success.
Darkman 2, The Return of Durant.
Oh, right, that happened.